Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. You know, the idea, you know, I think it's, are you?
Yeah, that's what gets to
Did they fix here?
They've been trying to.
Not yet? Okay, I think we should keep it open. You know, the criminalization of the mentally ill in the United States, does everybody understand the history and the evolution of the mentally ill generally, societally? You know, you can go back to the early eras of civilization, and the population of persons with mental illness, you know, how society chose to manage and control individuals with serious mental illnesses. Really, when you look at the, you know, the prehistoric types of, you know, whether it was locking them up, correct, or perceiving that individuals, you know, with schizophrenia, you know, maybe possessed by spirits, and there was no real treatment, and, you know, we kind of moved into the psychiatric age, and then kind of there was some pushback on the anti-psychiatric side. But ultimately, we get to the modern era of mental health, and we get to the introduction of modern pharmacology, correct? And so for the first time, individuals that had been locked up and institutionalized in asylums, you know, in these very large, really ostensibly on the outside, they looked gorgeous. I don't know if you have ever seen any of these state hospitals.
Yeah, beautiful.
But they're stunning, right? On the outside. And on the inside, you know,
they're very cold and sturdy.
Just you know, dungeons and pits of torture. I mean, unbelievable. The antithesis of that. And so when medication came out and symptomology was able to be remitted, and, you know, the whole treatment modalities began to think about the prospect of true rehabilitation, it was really coinciding, and everything always coincides with political conditions, correct? And so it was coinciding with the civil rights movement. So you see the marriage of psychology and law from all these, again, all these different angles. And it was not a surprise then that the civil rights movement of the 60s would ultimately intersect with what was happening in terms of the institutionalization and the treatment of individuals who were seriously mentally ill. So these federal class actions, you know, that I was referring to earlier had some very, very profound effects on state budgets across the country. And ultimately, you know, these really brave, courageous civil rights lawyers who were coming to the aid of patients who, you know, had absolutely, you know, were living in grotesque conditions, essentially incredibly inhumane, won these lawsuits, correct? But they were pitting very long-term settlement agreements that would run for, let's say, 20 years, having to do with major landmark U.S. constitutional decisions, having to do with very basic, big, core areas. Right to treatment, correct? You know, in terms of least restrictive types of environments that people, that's Jackson v. Indiana, correct? And so you had these major constitutional decisions come out, and then ultimately states went, well, you know, we don't want to pay for the improvements that these lawsuits anticipated, and so we are just going to go ahead and begin to close them down. So the policymakers, state by state by state by state, had to wrestle with these tensions of, well, what to do. If we're going to shut down these hospitals, then we have to put something in its place. And of course, that's where you had the Rehabilitative Act of 1963 come under the Kennedy administration. So the idea was, okay, we'll close down these horrible places, we'll start to create a community-based system of care, and then of course ultimately that never really happened. The monies didn't come, not in my backyard types of attitudes were really just driving every level of government, from the, obviously from the very grassroots local level, hello, up to, the state level. And ultimately, you saw what you're really seeing, today, back in the 70s ultimately, and that was that individuals were being discharged and released from these psychiatric hospitals with essentially nowhere to go. And so where did they end up? What? I'm sorry. They ended up in jail.
Prison, yes.
They ended up in jail and prison, and the criminalization of the mentally ill actually, originally was a term of art that came out of the state of California, and it really became much more of a colloquial type of reference to just what was happening all across the United States. The mental health court in Broward County really came on the heels, sort of the heels, of what was referred to initially, and what's still being referred to, as a problem-solving court, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what would be the problem that the mental health court was trying to solve would be the problem of the criminalization of the mentally ill, correct? Mm-hmm. The very first problem-solving court in the United States, I think you all know, was the drug court.
Drug court.
Correct.
Yes.
And who created the drug court?
that.
Does anybody know who led the creation of the drug court? Did you know where the drug court was first started? Miami.
I was thinking Miami.
It started right here, believe it or not. It started in Florida, it started in Miami, and at the time that the drug court started, it was Janet Reno, who was the district attorney, the state attorney in Miami-Dade. I know. And Janet Reno's father is Danish. And you're going to say, so, Judge Wren, what does that matter that Janet Reno's father is, everything has a backstory, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
Everything has a backstory in terms of how things happen. And her family, when you, living in Denmark, very, very, very ingrained in the impact of the Holocaust in Northern Europe. And really social justice became really a fabric of their family system. And so Janet Reno, during the 80s, when she was the district attorney for Miami-Dade, was really witnessing all these arrests, during that big Miami Vice, cocaine era, when everybody, not me, cocaine, but we all know, the story of the culture of the times, and she really was very, very obviously social justice oriented, and was looking and interested also in policy, and she was really interested in trying to find a way to break the criminalization of what she defined as substance abuse. And so in Miami-Dade, really just a groundbreaking innovation in court was the drug court model. Now, the drug court model used a legal philosophy that is called big name that is called therapeutic jurisprudence, TJ for short. And therapeutic jurisprudence, essentially, if you're going to be in forensic psychology, then you really have to know this. Therapeutic jurisprudence kind of asks a very simple question. And the simple question is, can courts become agents of healing? Can courts become agents of healing? And that theory, that scholarly theory of TJ, emerged out of the University of Miami School of Law in the mid to late 80s by the late, great Professor Bruce Winnick and his co-principal law professor, David Wexler, who, by the way, was also nominated in this competition, but didn't make it to The Hague. Okay. Just kidding. He was very upsetting. And very upsetting. And sure. It's horrible. And so the theory that they were working on surrounded initially, believe it or not having anything to do with the criminal justice system. It was focused instead around the civil commitment process, recognizing that people that were being forced into psychiatric hospitals, that experience was having what they described as a very significant anti-therapeutic impact on their well-being, correct?
Yes.
And then ultimately on how they would receive their attitudes about even engaging in mental health treatment. It was so traumatic, the whole getting taken away and whatever, locked down and restrained and whatever else was happening to them, rejected and against their will, and the whole thing was so traumatizing that it was Professor Winnick's view that if you married a more humanistic type of court approach to psychology being the civil commitment process, correct? That you would have a more therapeutic outcome, and if people believed that they were given voice during their court hearings, then in fact they would feel that the process was more fair, that even if the court held that they had, for example, to be committed for psychiatric treatment, that they would have a better feeling about the ultimate ruling, even if it wasn't what they wanted, and that therefore perhaps the idea, the theory, the hypothetical was, or the hypothesis was that they would accept treatment in a more positive way, and they would give it. So that theory that they wrote about and presented about in conference after conference after conference after conference, it finally kind of bubbled up to the National Institute of Mental Health, where they presented a very significant paper on the subject. And the theory itself, from a scholarship vantage point, really started to proliferate around. And so in Miami-Dade, when they started the drug court model, therapeutic jurisprudence became what you would describe as the legitimizing legal platform from which we can say, as judges and as other legal actors, because it was a collaborative effort between the district attorney's office, the public defender's office, the judges, and that particular community, that maybe putting people in prison for 10 years on a cocaine charge isn't the best thing to do. It's going to ruin their lives, correct? In a very big way. We all know that. And if the problem is truly one of a public health issue, that being substance abuse, maybe treatment over jail, right, is the better way. And clearly, at the time, when I interviewed Janet Reno about this innovation several years ago, at the time, they not only did they not really see this as terribly groundbreaking, but they just kind of really thought it made sense. It just really made sense. It was the right thing to do. It was, it certainly was consistent with this, with the public health science and the evidence base of everything we do. So we know that the drug court model is extraordinarily popular, correct? And I don't know, early on, the drug courts historically would not take individuals. I mean, it wasn't like they had a rule that you can see of writing, but their doors were not open to individuals with mental illnesses. These disorders were completely siloed from one another, and they really, didn't interlope back then the way they are beginning to now. Even now, it's not really where it needs to be. But ultimately, I think in some years you're going to see more hybrids courts really coming online in a much more positive way. But back then, you really couldn't even get individuals into a drug court, even if they had a co-occurring disorder, which we know is extremely prevalent. So if you back up into what was happening in Broward County at the time, in Broward County you had a terrible jail overpopulation, which many of the jails across the United States, and I think today or this week I just saw another article about the LA County Jail and what's happening in California with regards to their jail reorganization over there and the high prevalence of individuals with mental illness. But in Broward County, we certainly had an overpopulation with the jail cap. We had a number of individuals, at least at that time, there were at least 2 or 3 individuals that had committed suicide who were severely mentally ill in the jail. But more relevant than that, there was a very, very high-profile case. And you heard me reference this morning that one of the leaders on our local task force was a very, very charismatic public defender by the name of Howard Finkelstein. Mm-hmm. And Howard still to this day, he has a long ponytail that he always wears in a braid. And he is masterful at the media, and he was so, working with the media, and he was so fabulous when he was doing court commentary on the O.J. Simpson case that a local news station gave him his own legal segment. So the legal segment is called Help Me, Howard. Yeah. If you're ever down in South Florida, it's Channel 7. So Howard tells the story that he is representing a client who, at the time, when he was 16 years old, he got in a very, very bad motorcycle accident, incurred severe brain trauma, which really mimicked schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the story goes that his family tried for years to get Aaron help. Couldn't get him treatment, couldn't get him help. And he was in a Publix supermarket one day in Broward County, and he was at the lunch counter, and he goes to check out, and something really bad happened. At the point that he was going to check out, he dashes out of the store. He tragically collides with an 80-something-year-old woman who crashes down to the pavement and hits her head and dies, and Aaron Wynn is now charged with manslaughter. And so here comes Howard. And Howard goes over to speak to the family and basically, says to the family, look, everything's going to be fine, we'll do the best we can type of thing, and starts telling the family essentially, what his, trial strategy defense is going to look like. And his family said, you need to sit down. And the family basically went on to tell Howard the story of what happened to Aaron from the time of this motorcycle accident forward, which is an incredibly egregious story. And it really enlightened Howard to the point where he recognized, as the chief assistant public defender at the time, now he is the public defender, that his office was really doing nothing more than enabling, this revolving door cycle. The vast majority of individuals, that they thought they were doing a good thing if they had people that were homeless or were sick, psychiatrically sick or this or that, and they would just plea them out, get them out of jail, but they were just coming back. They would come back to jail, they'd go to emergency rooms, they'd go to homeless shelters, and they'd come back to jail. And they'd go to emergency rooms, they'd go to homeless shelters, and they'd come back to jail. Correct? And he really said for the first time that he understood that there has to be a different way. And so you heard me talk this morning that Broward, he also went ahead and initiated through media contact was a driving force behind a grand jury investigation of the deficits in the failings of our community-based mental health system at the time, to really drive, if you will, a lot of the newsworthiness of the fact, and to help prioritize the fact that we really have an urgent problem in Broward County with regards to our mental health treatment system. So when we had our task force, the idea essentially that something had to be done obviously was well received. It was well received by the media, and the Broward Mental Health Court was the solution that the task force decided upon. When I came to the bench, as we talked about this morning, I came with a very unique skill set. But the idea of a drug court, for example, versus a mental health court, what do you think is, if you think about it, and I'm asking you to kind of put on your lawyer hats, and I know you're not lawyers, but I want you to think a little bit in terms of a legal, now shift, if you will, to more of a legal lens. What do you think the difference is between a drug court, major difference, between a drug court and a mental health court, besides the disorder?
It's no different, is it?
What do you, anybody?
Perception.
Perception is a really big issue, by the way. Big.
Well, I'm thinking that one, you're dealing with the legal aspect of the drugs, and the other is mental health that is not nailed down.
That's right. One is a crime,
right,
and one is not.
Right.
But the idea that the criminalization of the mentally ill, problem-solving courts are what you call grassroots. They're grassroots. That's the beauty of this TJ invention. Now we'll talk about innovation a little bit. Let's talk about creating and really innovating something new and different that's so portable. And the idea that therapeutic jurisprudence can lay the foundation to solve very social, vexing social problems. That you have communities that, their county governments have failed them, because these usually aren't local. County governments have failed them, legislators have failed them on the state level, federal government, right? Well, we've seen what Congress hasn't done, correct? For so long. And so what do you do when you have these major problems falling on the doorsteps of your courthouses? What are you supposed to do? Do you go ahead and do you just become part of the problem, or do you try to fix it? We saw in Miami-Dade that under Janet Reno, they tried to fix a major problem that they saw. Problem-solving courts now, are the rage. They're absolutely the rage. Maybe even too much, but that's probably another aspect of it. But the idea that communities, through the legal institutions, through the marriage, really, of psychology for the most part, as the core discipline, could actually create courts that intersect, where these human problems really start to intersect, and become big fixes. Become big fixes. So, for example, when the mental health courts started, we had some launch pad. So we could launch using the drug court model, correct? Well, it's been done before, at least in that venue. Maybe it hasn't been done, for example, with this particular population in this kind of a way, but we know we have a really big problem. The criminalization of the mentally ill, is a huge problem. Current data, I think, is anywhere, depending upon what study that you read, is anywhere from, let's say, 16 to 20%, and I've seen reports up to almost 50% of jails and prisons really turning into de facto psychiatric hospitals, correct? In 2003, and it's captured somewhere in this particular profile of the court, that Human Rights Watch did a special report on the criminalization of mentally ill in the United States, and came down actually to Broward's court and spent a few days with us and used the Broward model as a recommended strategy to divert people out of the criminal justice system and prevent this further escalation and penetration into the criminal justice system, so you wouldn't have reduce, if you will, the terrible abuses that they have found in the supermax prisons in the United States. So when we started the mental health court, we kind of understood a few things. We understood that we had a population that was not able to effectively access mental health treatment. Why do you all think that is, or was, or still is?
Too expensive. Funding.
What?
Funding. Too expensive.
Finance is one, correct. What else? Say no. What is it?
Politics.
Politics.
Not from
Policy. Poor policy. Okay. What else?
When you're saying politics, are you thinking the mindset behind it, not necessarily the government?
It's in the government aspect, yeah.
The diversion of funding to creating more jails and.
Well, certainly the poor policy has led to, shortfalls and broken, and fragmented mental health systems of care, correct? So I guess that's where the politics comes in. What about the discrimination?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Which has
That's
more
population.
just.
Is that how you define politics, as discrimination?
Because we know that majority of, we'll call it, drug dealers are African American.
No.
And what do you do with them?
No,
You just lock them up.
But, okay, that's a picture I think that's painted for us to believe.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out the political label. But I suppose, I understand what, in terms of the political label, I guess I'm thinking a little different when I think of politics. I'm thinking more about legislation and things like that. But politics is cross-cutting to a large degree, yes.
When you say when you say what did you say? When he said like I think he was trying to say it's along in the same line as in blacks would be characterized as this. And like when you get discriminated against, you characterize as a certain thing. Like me, I really tell people when I need to. But with my disability, that's why I asked the question in there.
Right.
Would it be too much for me to bear? Because with my disability,
I
get
people.
Had a disability. You don't.
No.
Most people don't wear it on their sleeve, but I tell people, I make sure it's known so that when people do talk to me, they can understand where I'm coming from, so it won't seem like I'm a blur, Because like my disability sometimes will cause me to jump off subject, but I will come back. You get what I'm saying? So I have to tell people so they'll know how to talk to me, how to approach me, without feeling like they have to cater to me so much. So the discrimination comes from me is in just actually going into the legal field. Will they accept me and think it, or will they think belittle of me because of what my disability is? You know what I'm saying?
I'm still thinking, well, what kind of, I don't pick. I can't even identify. I can't even identify a disability. So why? I guess the ultimate question is why self-identify a disability and create a barrier that isn't even observable. There's some disabilities, for example, that are evident, and there's other disabilities that aren't. And some disabilities that you might, I could actually see, for example, a disability that, people might want to self-identify having to do, for example, one thing that comes to mind is like maybe a closed head injury, that, really impacts individuals' ability to speak or something like that. And somebody might say, I just want to let you know I've had, I had a traumatic accident in case this happens. I just want to. I don't think it's necessary to even consider it. No. I mean, I'm not sure where that's coming from, but I'm just letting you know if you're looking for a little input, just randomly, you're awesome. There's nothing that anybody would ever detect with regards to anything. So I don't know that you need to telegraph it. Yeah. I think if it comes up and there's an issue in terms of that deals with you need an accommodation that you're entitled to, then they have particular regulatory people and staff that you can go to. And you can say, look, I have to take a test. I'm going to have a little issue with this. Here's my, and you deal with it from the legal construct. You don't need to deal with it from the social construct. No. You're fine. Yeah, so you are perfect. You are perfect. No.
Yeah, see, I was thinking what he was saying.
You want to be balanced, right? Everybody agrees. I think we have a group vote on this. You are fine. You do not need to self-disclose, correct? Because that's not a networking tool that's going to help you. No. Right.
Yeah, but
correct? That's fair to say.
Yeah, but they say that, but then when you look on the back end, they'll say, well, why didn't you say anything? So I'm getting, you see how he said the blacks are characterized like, oh, they're going to be thieves, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. So when you say, oh, she had the mentality, she's going to be like this, she's going to be like that. So that's why I was
that's stereotypic thinking, and we're, we are in an academic setting, and it's okay to, we need to acknowledge the realities. We need to acknowledge, what we need to be able as professionals to understand biases and understand all of that and work against that, correct? And to overcome that. So I think, you'll develop a more balanced approach to how you want to address it, but no issue. No issue. So, one of the issues, that when we first started the mental health court, it was, everybody, well, I would think that many of you know that great book, Tipping Point, by Malcolm Gladwell. And, we really struck a nerve, meaning that so many communities and jurisdictions were looking for some kind of response on what I would define as a very high authoritative level. Meaning nobody gets into jail or prison without first passing by a judge. So when you have a judge that recognizes, now wait a minute, what is happening in this justice system is unjust and we are going to do something about it, correct? Even if it's a strategy, even if it's not anything, major, because we did consider it a rather simple, commonsensical, strategy at the time to find people who were arrested, knowing and presuming that, there's a lot of dehumanization, obviously a tremendous amount of baggage, correct? And that a good portion of these people, a good percentage of these people ended up in jail when in fact they should have been hospitalized, correct, in the first place. So the idea was, can we use the court then to kind of level the playing field and find the sickest of the sick that were entering our local jail system, and we started on a misdemeanor level. So those are the ones that I really want to get to, the quality of life types of offenses, those that are homeless, those that are, are acting bizarrely, manifesting symptoms, right, of psychosis, for example, and then being hauled into jail because the police just don't want to take the time, even though they have the authority to Baker Act and commit, correct? They do have the legal authority and discretion to do that, but it takes too long. They have to sit there for 4 or 5 hours. Yes.
And I think it's not just that they have the ability, but they don't have the knowledge behind it. You know, what does psychosis
Correct.
look like?
And they don't have the knowledge unless they're specially trained, yes.
And there are the CSU beds to put them in.
And there are the CSU beds to put them
But
in,
look at
correct.
the gentleman in Fullerton, California that was killed. You know, he was mentally ill, and he was sitting on a bench not even bothering anybody. And then the police officers got off.
Yeah, I mean, these tragedies are becoming, you know, we think that, look, there's been specialized police teams now since 1987. CIT police trainings actually started 10 years before the mental health court started out of Memphis, Tennessee, with the police shooting.
What is CIP?
Crisis intervention training
Okay.
for law enforcement. Very popular. Police models all over the country. The problem is, you know, and you can see the prevalence, if we talk about, you know, the perfect storms, you know, broken delivery systems, the high degree of stigma and discrimination, people that, you know, don't even want to seek treatment because of the discrimination, and then, you know, not having health insurance, adequate funding, parity, etc., you know, and not having the service beds and the service systems that are adequate. So, you know, put that all together, and, you know, that is ultimately, you know,
Yeah.
leads to a crisis. And I don't think you will ever have enough CIT officers trained
For real.
because, you know, that will be able to handle any single
Everything.
random call that comes up, and tragedies still happen. Even though you have, I give that CIT model tremendous credit. I mean, they have accelerated tremendously, and it's extraordinarily popular strategy for law enforcement. And I think that culturally, law enforcement has done a very good job, you know, in moving forward toward really recognizing that people with mental illness, you know, need to be handled and responded to very differently. And, but still, so many people, you know, fall through those cracks and tragedy happens, correct? And of course the tragedy with Senator Deeds in Virginia is just unbelievable. Unbelievable that a senator in his own state couldn't get his son, you know, into a crisis bed.
Yeah.
It's shocking. It was, that story is beyond
Didn't he
shocking.
slice him across the face or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Stabbed multiple times.
Wow.
and then of course the son committed suicide. So these tragedies, obviously, until we get a mental health care delivery system that's really built to capacity, more than likely, obviously, are going to keep happening. But I think that from a forensic, but what does it mean to you all? I mean, I really think that's the critical point. What does it mean to you all? And very simply, it means that these problem-solving courts has led to a whole different level of thinking from individuals in criminal justice and corrections, and across all spectrums. They don't even talk about problem-solving courts anymore. That language is actually almost archaic. They really talk about problem-solving justice now. And, you know, it includes reentry, it includes diversion in every single manner you could possibly think of. And does everybody, when I say diversion, that jargon, do you know what I'm talking about? What am I talking about?
I would take a high-level guess and say it's diverting the people in this, either coming from the system or going into the system, trying to provide a different means.
Correct. There's essentially two basic phases of diversion. You could have pre-booking diversion, correct? Pre-booking, an example of pre-booking diversion are police models or mobile crisis models, meaning you divert before a potential arrest. No arrest. Pre-booking, no arrest. Correct? Pre-booking. That's the front door or the back door. The front door or the back door?
Front door.
That's the front door.
Of the back door. The
Right.
criminal justice system being the back door,
Right.
correct? Front door of the system is your community-based system, Kara.
Yes.
Back door is the other stuff, right? What happens when that fails?
Right.
Okay. So essentially, other diversion would be like pre-trial diversion, right? Examples of pre-trial diversion are called post-booking models. Post-booking. That's where you all start to come in. Because post-booking, well, actually, you can come in on the previous too, actually. I'm sure you can. Post-booking diversionary models are like your problem-solving courts, correct? Your drug courts, your mental health courts, your teen courts, your juvenile courts, your girls' courts, your domestic violence courts, which are really more accountability courts than problem-solving courts, but that's just a nuance. But domestic violence courts are specialized courts. All of these courts are where your role has dramatically shifted. Why? Why? If you're going to go into forensic psychology. Why has the role dramatically shifted in these courts? It's a really easy answer. Jail, treatment, trial, hint, hint. They're not adverse.
They're not aversive.
They're not adversive. They are really not trial courts. What are they? They're therapeutic courts. They're your courts. They are built for you.
Yep. Help you include.
You are the stars of the therapeutic court. Not the lawyers. You. In therapeutic courts, lawyers say very little. In therapeutic courts, forensic experts say a lot. You are actually expanding your role, one of what you would call a traditional fact witness, right? And just based on just a basic expert fact witness, correct? Now expanding and shifting to one really kind of sort of somewhere in, not quite an advocate, but you're kind of moving toward that advocate continuum because you're problem solving. Because you are becoming a problem solver. That means your knowledge base also has to expand. It can't simply be now, I don't mean simple, it's never, I mean, your knowledge base is not simple, so please, I didn't mean to say it like that. But more so than a traditional forensic expert witness now, you're also going to have to get somewhat hands-on and knowledgeable about community resources. Because this is where treatment matching is going to really, really acutely matter. Because courts, if a judge is going to listen to you, you want to be right. If you want to have the court's respect and credibility, you want to be really top of your game. You want to be able to identify the needs, the individual needs of a person that you're representing or standing before a court on or called to, right? You want to be able to explain it to the judge. Because remember, there's no jury here. You're not testifying like that. You could be giving testimony, but you're not testifying in a true traditional trial, jury trial sense or court sense in a trial context. So you want to make sure that what you're telling the judge from an evaluative vantage point, from a diagnostic vantage point, and actually from a problem-solving vantage point is right. Why? Because the court has risk. This is risk. We all have risk. You have risk too. correct? But ultimately, who has the greater risk? Oh, the community, the judge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it always falls back to the judge, doesn't it? That darn judge. How can that judge do that? Isn't it right? How could that judge let that person out? What are you talking about? It has nothing to do with the judge. It was this, it was this, it was the evidence, it was that, it was the prosecutor. People don't want to know from that. They don't want to know the details of what happens in a legal matter, correct? They just say, look, judges know that. We all know that. It's the judge's fault if something bad happens. Something bad happened, oh, that judge. Right?
He got it in.
So the judges really want to make sure that what we do is right.
Yeah.
It's safe, it's appropriate, it's effective, we're going to get good outcomes, you know. So your role in a problem-solving type of court, I think, is just premier. And that's what I was trying to say this morning. The mental health court is an example. It's a great example. It's not even a new example anymore. This court has been around for 17 years. We're going on our 17th year. It's the springboard for Veterans Court. It's the springboard for... Look, it's a great, not to pat myself on the back, great innovation, correct? Great human rights tool.
In your documentation that you provide for us, do you track any of the cases or mention any of the cases that you've seen, the outcomes that you expected?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been evaluated, studied, written about, filmed. Yeah, we love our outcomes. We have great promise, we have great limitation. I mean, it's a voluntary court. You know that, right? You'll read up on it. Purely voluntary. It's not a back door to force mandatory treatment. It's a human rights effort, plain and simple. We use connectivity, just like what Dr. Gold was talking about, really connecting with the people, taking the court process and lifting them up in the court process, and really taking what traditionally would be a scary place to be, correct? And coming from a trauma-informed place, and instead turning the whole process around and using it as an opportunity to provide, I think, some very badly needed social justice to people, if they want it. And if they want it, even with very scarce resource, we will do the best we can, obviously, to do everything we can for them. Using the court literally as a structural piece of our system of care to kind of braid and put together pieces of a broken system together in order to do treatment planning for an individual in a very, very holistic way. You can read about it. It's not complicated. It's very, very commonsensical. It was a very commonsensical, simple idea. We rely on the community goodwill, the collaborative of the community, the resources of the community, who we know from this morning through a very elongated task force process really decided that they were going to break down their own turfs, right? That they were going to change the way that they were thinking about how they use their own organizational resources, and decide that we really, really want to get these people who are sick, who needed to be in the hospital, who deserve to be in the community, who we believe in recovery, that they're going to change the way they do business. And so leadership is huge. Leadership matters, but for the purposes of our discussion for you all, this area of how courts are going to be humanized, how courts are going to reduce spiraling, crushing law enforcement budgets, correct? Are going to come down to you.
Do they have courses where they train you how to recognize that person that's willing to abuse the mental court? That's not really mentally, but do they train you to recognize that particular person that's coming in and they're not really mentally disabled. They're just
I have a
assistant.
clinician in my courtroom.
Huh?
I have a clinician actually in the court who I handpick. She's brilliant, award-winning internationally on her own. We do the screening in the courtroom.
Oh.
So during the trial?
There's no trial.
No trial during the time that they come to you and.
I'll put a YouTube up on our website. You can go to browardmentalhealthcourt.info. browardmentalhealthcourt.info. We did that. A colleague of mine did a nice website for us to follow us to The Hague last month. And she did a beautiful website. We're going to shift it a little bit now that the award is over. But there's some great pictures and resources and materials on that site.
Yes, ma'am. I had read your publication, Wounds of War, and I wanted to ask you where your desires stem from in terms of that publication.
I didn't write. Wounds of War is the name of the symposium. Which publication? The Public Health Summit?
Well, in terms of the active duty military.
Oh, I'm teaching. Oh, okay. It's my doctoral course that I'm teaching for Nova.
Yes.
And that comes under, thank you, that comes under one of our weeks is devoted to veterans, men and women, and military sexual trauma, and post-traumatic stress disorder, TBI, the whole thing is part of my course.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, when you, like I was saying earlier, when you do this work and you get into the specialized court processes, it really does make sense to start to build your knowledge base across all of these populations. And, you know, you're going to have to become kind of expert in all these different areas, I think. It'll be very helpful to you. And in public health policy, generally, if you're not, it really helps to pay attention to public health policy. Well, we're wrapping up. I hope you are really intrigued. I hope I just kind of whet your appetite a little bit about just the absolute power of your field. And I really think it's only going to just completely continue in this vein for decades to come. So good luck to you all. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm a former student of yours. I'm a grad student at Nova. Next week we will be in town.
Yes, you can come to Mental Health Court.
You got that.
Yes, courtroom 343. Courtroom 343. And we meet Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursday mornings from 9 o'clock to 10:30.
We won't be able to make it because we're leaving here at 9 o'clock on Thursday.
Will you be there on Tuesday?
No, we're leaving Thursday. We're going to be there Thursday till Sunday.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What is it?
Broward 343.
343.
Courtroom 343, Broward
And
County
it's Monday,
Courthouse.
Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30.
Well, if you're ever in Fort Lauderdale, please, door's always open.
Okay.
It's an open courtroom. We'd love to have visitors.
Monday, Tuesday, Thursday,
Yes.
at 9.
I'm very familiar with it.
9 to 10:30.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it. Okay. Yes, we're good. Very nice. Thank you. That is fabulous. I'm very excited about that flash go first aid.
Yeah, I just got certified.
Yeah, I love it. And
Hi, just a quick question. I heard you mention the stigma behind mental illness and how people have a hard time going to seek help because of that. And I'm actually the president of Active Minds, if you've heard of that.
No.
It's an organization. Well, it's a national thing. I'm wondering if it's a president of youth campaigns like this. Something that works with the mental health.
Yes,
I'm going in the
absolutely.
right direction.
You know, the whole court is really designed to reduce it.